Hello, everyone, and welcome to part one of the Yellow Wallpaper. Our short story unit is continuing. We are done with Ray Bradbury, we're done with Guy de Maupassant, and we're done with Faulkner. Now we have a female voice, a female author coming through, and we're going to be talking a lot about feminine themes. And I cannot wait to share with you the elements that we're going to go over today. So, what did you think of the yellow wallpaper? Was it unsettling, kind of freaky, uncomfortable? If you got all the way to the end of the story, you'll see that there, of course, is that twist, that shock, that irony that we have been noticing in every short story that comes at the end. That very last moment where you hit the reader with some sort of twist that makes them gape and be shocked and be in awe of the way everything led up to that moment. And of course, when you go back and reread it, you'll see all the moments of foreshadowing. And that's how short stories really create this structure to have the most impactful meaning in such a short space. But I will give it to you. The Yellow Wallpaper is probably one of the most terrifying short stories out there because it's both very gothic and scary, but at the same time, it's so realistic as well. Let's go over just a few fun facts. The Yellow Wallpaper was written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, also known as Charlotte Perkins Stetson sometimes. And she was born in 1860, died in 1935. So kind of like Faulkner, she was straddling the two ages of the 1800s and the 1900s, which brought so much change, Industrial Revolution, the First World War. And so it's an interesting perspective to see two people, but from different parts of the country. Faulkner was from the South, Gilman was from up in the East Coast. And so we have a bit of a different perspective, although there are some similarities. And we might talk about the similarities since the leading characters of each of their stories are women, strong women as well. She was a novelist, but also what I want you guys to notice for this story in particular, she was an advocate for social reform. She was a leader of the women's movement at this time when she was younger, when she was even, actually older. Women still didn't have the right to vote. Women didn't have the right to own property. Women were dependent on men. And she was a leader of the women's movement, even wrote a book called Women in Economics, which is a radical call for economic independence for women. Given these themes of women trying to get more power because they feel like they're not treated equally in society, that brings us to the yellow wallpaper. Now, the elements that we're going to be going over today, number one, setting and genre. How did the setting and genre help to relate to certain themes? And we'll go over those themes in a moment. Of course, we're going to talk about structure and see how the rising action leads to the climax, leads to the falling action, and how that relates to the theme. And then we're going to dive into two important characters, John, the husband, and the narrator, whose name we do not know. We do not learn the main character's name, mainly because she's writing as if it were a diary. And I want you guys to think about the symbolism of the diary, the fact that no one can read what she's saying. It's the only place where she feels like she can really tell the truth and say and be exactly who she wants to be. And it's really the place where she actually has power. Outside of her diary, she doesn't have any power. And this brings us to our themes. And there may be many more themes than this. These are just the ones that we're going to go over today. We're going to go over the effect of repression. This is a concept in psychology. It has to do with something that you do with your mind, even if you're not aware that you're doing it. Repression means you are pushing down or silencing thoughts and feelings that you're not supposed to have or you're not supposed to share. And this, the yellow wallpaper, is a reflection and illustration of what happens when you repress thoughts and feelings for too long. When other people do not let you say the things that you want to say, when they just keep saying, no, you are not smart enough, or no, you're not strong enough to have these thoughts or these ideas. And then a little connection back to Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, woman's confinement in a patriarchal society. Remember, patriarchal means the man is in power in every relationship. The man is favored. The man has more power. But for women, that often means that they are limited in their power. If a man has more power, he's taking it away from the woman, or else the woman would be able to share in that power. So there's a sense that you have to confine the limits of what a woman can do so that she doesn't encroach on the man's domain and the man's power. So in the story, John wants to feel like the big man, like he's making all the decisions, and therefore, whenever the narrator says something, he pushes it aside. Now, the physical confinement, she's actually confined to a room physically, literally, is going to also be reflected in how she's confined mentally. She feels mentally like she's going to go crazy because she has nobody to talk to. And so we're seeing what are the effects of this. The yellow wallpaper is a very imaginative example of what the effects of that would be. So first, let's go over setting and genre. Let's talk about Gothic. This story is clearly written in the Gothic genre. So we're going to go over some elements. What does it mean if something's Gothic? Well, these five little characteristics might help to explain what kinds of things you find in the Gothic genre. Isolation and confinement. Okay, so if you think of haunted stories, if you think of anything spooky or scary, they writers will hone in on someone being isolated or confined in order to express fear and terror. Nobody wants to be confined, right? Like a very famous trope would be being buried in a coffin or being buried alive, right? That kind of confinement even is really produces a lot of terror because we don't like the idea of being confined. Madness, going crazy, going insane, which is exactly what happens to our narrator. Supernatural, mystery, of course, that's what happens. She thinks she sees a woman in the wallpaper, even though there is nobody in the wallpaper. It's just wallpaper. She goes crazy. But we don't know because the story makes it seem like it's really happening. Decay. The house that she's in is decaying, and intense emotion and fear. Okay, so we know that when it comes to the yellow wallpaper, it produces a very emotional response in her. And there is maybe not a fear so much in her at the sight of the woman. She actually wants to free the woman and she identifies herself as the woman in the wallpaper. But we are, and John become very afraid at the end when she has lost all of her senses of rationality because as a woman, she has pretty much been pushed to become this kind of crazy woman. There's a quote where she says, "There's something strange about the house. I can feel it." Sounds like a typical horror story, right? A horror story about a haunted house. Well, this is definitely a story about a haunted house. The house is haunted because many, many generations of women have been treated just like she has, have been seen as unequal, inferior to man, and therefore the house is a representation of this place of fear and confinement. But let's go read just a little bit more about the setting. Now, perhaps you had some difficulty with the story because it is written, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s. So there is a bit of a sense that this is not our the way that we write anymore. So it can be a little difficult. But let's go through and I'm going to explain some things that might be difficult. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say. I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I would proudly declare that there is something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And why it have stood so long untenanted? Okay, so this is the setting right here. And I can imagine some of you might not be understanding what's going on here, but I typically, people who have money will be able to go and rent a house or rent some sort of place for another season, maybe the summer or the winter, and spend their time leisurely at this place. Now, she says it's very seldom that mere ordinary people like myself would be able to secure this beautiful mansion for our holiday. But so I guess that shows us that they're not really maybe in the highest class. Maybe they're in the middle class. But this idea of ancestral hall is really helping us with the Gothic, okay? Because Gothic stories are often set in old mansions, colonial mansion, and a whole estate. And there's just something, I don't know why, creepy about a big old mansion with probably like tons of rooms that you can't even, know what's going on in all of the rooms. And so she really sees it as a haunted house. But what we get to notice is that they are not at home. They are on holiday. And what we'll soon find out is that John is trying to help the narrator get better from whatever sickness she thinks she has. So he shuts her up because he doesn't want her to get even sicker. But let's go ahead and keep reading. Oh, so it says, why should it be let so cheaply? So let means to be rented out. And she's curious. She's like, well, why is it that this house, which typically, I mean, this mansion is so expensive, would only be let out to people who have money. Why is it that we were able to afford it? Why is it that it has stood so long without any people living in it? Tenant, that's what a tenant is a person who lives in a house or an apartment. So these are our questions that help us with this Gothic theme, right? Why is it that this house, why does nobody want to be here? Well, you kind of go crazy if you live here, if you stay here, like what happened to the narrator, she goes crazy. And you see this foreshadowing here, right, of why people don't want to let the house. There's something strange about the house. To me, I think it's because the room that she's going to stay in, I think it's a place where they often will put women, to be confined. Scary over the generations, right? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. He's a physician, like a doctor, and perhaps I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper, and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. Well, that's ironic. If your husband's a doctor, should seem like you'd get the best advice and the best medicine and you'd get well faster. But she thinks it's the very opposite. She thinks because he's so obsessed with science and he thinks science is the only way, like if you have no physical symptoms, then you must be making it up. You're not sick. However, what this story is showing is the internal breakdown of a woman. She's not showing the scars on her body. So John doesn't believe her. He says, you see, he does not believe I am sick. And what can one do? However, she feels a depression slowly seeping over her. She feels that she's unwell, but she doesn't know how to talk about it to anybody. John, who laughs at her anytime that she tries to speak her mind, says, "Oh, psh, you're not depressed. If you were depressed, we'd be able to see it." And so he just doesn't believe her. He always ignores what she's feeling. And that goes back to our theory or our themes about having to push something down. Listen, she can only talk to dead paper, not just paper, but dead paper. Why does she use the word dead? Obviously, it helps with our Gothic theme, but it's really such a stark realization that no one living, not a living soul, she can really confide in and talk to. And wouldn't you go crazy too if someone all the time was gaslighting you to make you think that you didn't feel what you're really feeling? So there's a classic motif in this story. She says, "And what can I do? What am I supposed to do? Right? I'm a woman. What can one do if your husband is more powerful than you?" She says it again. What is one to do? And that motif is very interesting to me. Again, it helps us see the effects of a woman being confined. Her brother's also a physician, so she's around a lot of powerful men in her life. They give her all types of things to take, medicine to take. They tell her to go out and walk, but they tell her you're not able to work. And we know she's a writer. I think she's a writer, which is why she's writing all the time. Um, but she's forbidden to do any sort of work. She's in for which is kind of interesting because, women typically are not seen as in this time as working. Usually it's the man who works. So okay, trying to take away a bit of what it means to be for her a working woman. And so now she's confined to the room without being able to do anything. So she says, I did write for a while in spite of them, right? She's a writer. But it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it. So she has to try, in order to be herself, she has to hide. And that's why she slowly, slowly sees herself as becoming this woman in the wallpaper. And so she will, say, I would like to talk about this, but um, John doesn't want me to talk about it. And John says the very worst thing I can do is to think about the things that I need to think about. So what does she do? She's like, oh, well, I guess we'll just move on. Let's talk about something else. You see how she's digressing to another topic, but really we know that's not what she wants to talk about. But what's going to happen is her now talking about the house, right? This haunted house with the yellow wallpaper. This will be the symbol, the wallpaper will be where she channels all of the things that she cannot say and the things that she cannot do. So she describes how beautiful the house is, but she soon gets to the wallpaper. And it's the wallpaper that's in the room that she's forced to stay in, even though she doesn't like the room. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. Um, but John says that she lacks control, so she has to take her, um, take all of her medicine and all of that, and she's got to try to control herself. But she says, I don't like our room. I wanted one downstairs that opened on the piazza. It had roses all over the window, all this beauty, but John would not hear of it. He said there was only one window and not room for two beds, and no near room for him if he took another. He's, and then what we see is that he tries to like treat her like a child, so much so that she now thinks that she's a child, and she usually will defer to John's opinion because for so long she's been, made to think that John is the one who's always right. So she's like, "Oh, he's very careful and loving." That's not what I would say, right? I would say, "Well, he's very controlling and just wants to be the one who's right." But you see, sometimes you can convince people that what you're doing is not bad. And I think that's what John is convincing her of. She's made to internalize and believe that she is not the one that's wrong. And that is another psychological thing that can that can make us feel repressed. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour of the day, all of this stuff about how she, what she has to do because John tells her. But then she talks about the wallpaper. The paint and paper look as if a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off the paper in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach. And in a great place on the other side of the room, I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It's dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly, you commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in an unheard of contradictions. Already, this wallpaper seems to be showing itself like it's going to be symbol, right? The wallpaper itself, the drawings, the curves want to commit suicide. And we know um, it's something kind of eerily happening at the end is when she turns crazy. And she obviously doesn't want to be herself anymore. She can't be herself anymore. She turns into the woman who's trapped in the wallpaper. The color is repellent, almost revolting, I guess, like the page on this story. A smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow turning sunlight. It's a dull yet lurid orange, in some places a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it, right? Because she sees they tried to rip it off. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long, which she does. There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. Wow. All the conditions for her going to blow up and become crazy, right? If you're kept in this zoo, it's like, if you keep an animal in a zoo for too long, um, they start to display some strange behaviors, not like their natural behaviors. So, I just wanted to share with you how this horrid wallpaper keeps coming back into her mind. She keeps coming back to it. And so she really is becoming quite obsessed with this wallpaper. So let's take a quick look at how the structure of the story helps to unveil her relationship with the wallpaper. So the exposition, we're obviously learned that a woman who's got some sort of depression, obviously it's a sickness that you can't see, so it's a sickness of your mind. She's got some problem, right? Some sadness. And she's confined in a secluded room in that crazy house by her husband. And while John continues to dismiss her feelings, she becomes fascinated by the yellow wallpaper. She starts seeing shapes and movement within the wallpaper, ultimately to the point where she tears the wallpaper down because she sees this woman trapped behind the the pattern of the wallpaper. So that's the climax is she tears all the wallpaper down, right? The story is called The Yellow Wallpaper. The climax would be the destruction of the wallpaper. And she frees herself from the wallpaper. When she tears off the wallpaper, she becomes the woman from the wallpaper, and she no longer is the narrator anymore. She identifies herself as this woman who has freed herself. But in the process, she loses her sanity. And her husband even comes in and is like, "What the heck is going on in here?" And he faints. And as he faints, she just crawls right over him, like as if she's some sort of spider. Um, anyway, not human. So we could see the effects that the wallpaper has on her and how her being a woman in this time period when women might not have felt free in the sense of you're an agent of your own free will. This is the conclusion of what happens to you if you are confined for too long, caged for too long. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper into these two characters before we get into any more about the wallpaper, which we'll do a lot in our next lecture. But today, let's just try to find a little bit of evidence for what's going on with these two characters. You're going to have an activity right now, and in this activity, you're going to come up with 3 quotes for each of these characteristics. So for John, I would say he treats the narrator like a child and he's very controlling. I want you to find 3 examples of when he controls her, either through his actions or through something that he says to her. On the other hand, you're going to be finding the narrator, quotes about the narrator. Anytime she feels the need to hide her true thoughts or feelings, you're going to put a quote in that column. The worksheet on the Google Classroom looks like this. It's the same exact table. And when you're done entering all of your quotes, you're going to press turn it in on the Google Classroom. You'll get 10 minutes, and then we will resume. Great job. I thought it'd be fun to share some of the quotes that I picked out. I actually chose five for each just because there was so much I didn't know which ones to choose. They were all so great. For John, let's see how he treats the narrator like a child. Did you choose some of the same quotes that I did? Number one, John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. That was right from the beginning, right? That's an example of him not treating her like she's equal, right? When you laugh at someone, you're like, oh, cute little baby. And then she's saying that's what marriage is like. Marriage is like when your husband treats you like a child. That's a striking, shocking thing to say. Perhaps we don't feel that way anymore. Women don't feel that way anymore. Perhaps they do in some cases or in some places. But it is interesting to see that in a marriage, often the man feels like he has more say or like he is more intelligent, more powerful, more capable making decisions. Okay. Um, I think I already went over this quote as well. He's very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. He doesn't let me do anything unless he tells me to do it. I have a scheduled prescription each hour of the day. He takes all care from me, right? Oh, you don't have to do anything. I will tell you everything you need to do. And then he tries to make it seem like that she should be grateful. Oh, I feel so basely ungrateful not to value it more. No, you don't need to be grateful for things when you feel like someone is lying, not lying, when someone is gaslighting you, making you feel like you're wrong. But she doesn't know the tools to think in that way because this is how women feel. This is how women experience the world in her time. Okay, when I get really well, John says we will ask cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit. But he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as to let me have those stimulating people about now. Okay, so we need you to rest. We don't want these stimulating people around you. Okay, but she thinks that it would be great to have company. Again, he's just trying to confine her, to isolate her, even in the way that he talks to her. What is it, little girl? He said. Don't go walking about like that. You'll get a cold. Sounds like he's talking to a child, right? And then he took me in his arms and he called me a blessed little goose. So just in the way they interact with each other, their dialogue also has just the feeling that she's a child. Now, here are my examples for the narrator needing to hide true thoughts and feelings. I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal having to be so sly about it, or else meet with heavy opposition. Number two, there comes John. I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. Number three, John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. So he's like, well, why would you be sad? Why would you be depressed? There's no reason to be sad. Therefore, you're not sad. That's how his doctor mind works. And she's like, he doesn't know how much I suffer. It's pretty sad. Even if she told him, he wouldn't believe her. So, of course, you're going to go crazy in that kind of environment. I think sometimes that if I were only well enough to write a little, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me. She really hits something true here. That writing, that speaking to other people about your problems does make you feel better. And yet she's made to repress and keep all the ideas inside. I cry at nothing and cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here or anybody else, but when I am alone. Okay, so she's very alone. And all of these examples show that. She's alone. She is made to repress her thoughts. And we know that when you try to push something down and ignore it, it only comes back stronger. Well, that was really fun. Great job today. We are going to have you reread the yellow wallpaper for homework because you have an assignment, and this assignment would, of course, require you to go back and take a look at the text. Let's go read what your literary analysis paragraph is going to be about this week. Okay, here we are. You guys are going to use this same structure that we've been using to make your claim, to answer the question through your own interpretation, to give examples, provide quotes, and analyze the text, provide your second example and analyze that. And your question is this: why did the author choose to use elements of the Gothic genre? Remember, those are isolation, confinement, madness, mystery, the supernatural, decay, intense emotion, and fear. Remember the decay of the wallpaper. It just shows how many years and years and years people have been trying to rip the wallpaper in order to tell the story of the narrator's experience as a woman. So you might want to think of those themes: woman's confinement or limitations in a patriarchal society, the need to silence and quiet, repress your thoughts and feelings as a woman because other people aren't going to take you seriously. Why did the author choose a Gothic genre for this? Why did she choose to set it where she did? I cannot wait to read your answers. Please don't forget to turn it in when you are finished. Well, that was part one. We haven't even descended into her madness yet. So for part two, we're going to take a look at how she goes crazy. How does it happen? What is going to be the changing relationship with the wallpaper? And how does the idea that she has freed the woman, does this mean that she is free herself? All of these will come in our next lecture. See you guys later. Bye bye.